In the dusty expanses of the Wild West, a seemingly straightforward scheme spirals into chaos when a notorious motorcycle club kidnaps the wife of a rancher, aiming to force him to sell a crucial piece of land. But they've made a fatal mistake. She's not just any rancher's wife, but one of the most formidable federal marshals ever to uphold the law. Her capture sets off a relentless chain of events that threaten to dismantle a criminal empire. As the story unfolds, deception, courage, and a relentless pursuit of justice collide, bringing the gritty reality of battle against organized crime to life. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button for our YouTube channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming stories. Your support truly helps us share these hard-hitting stories with more people. The sun was just beginning to set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as it dipped behind the rugged mountains that dominated the landscape of the small town of Dry Creek. In this quiet part of the West, where the law was often only as strong as those who enforced it, peace was a delicate commodity. Elena Hayes, with her sun-bleached hair pulled back into a tight braid and eyes as sharp as the eagle's, watched from the porch of her modest ranch house. Her gaze was calm but vigilant, a reflection of her life lived on the edge of law enforcement and domestic tranquility. Unknown to most, beneath the facade of a rancher's wife, Elena was a federal marshal, her badge hidden away but her skills as lethal as ever. As the daylight waned, a dust cloud appeared in the distance. It grew larger, and soon, the distinct rumble of motorcycles broke the evening's silence. Elena's hand moved instinctively to her side, where her gun usually rested, but she reminded herself she was home, supposedly safe. The roar grew louder and a group of riders clad in leather and denim pulled up to her gate. The leader, a large man with a scar running down his face, removed his helmet and sneered. "Evening, ma'am. We need to have a word with your husband. It's about his land." Elena's heart pounded in her chest, not out of fear, but from the adrenaline of knowing this was not a friendly visit. "He's not here," she replied coolly. "And he's not selling." The man's sneer grew into a malicious grin. "Well then, perhaps you can persuade him." Without warning, two men grabbed her from behind, handcuffing her before she could react. As they dragged her towards a waiting van, her mind raced. She assessed her captors, their strengths, their weapons. She knew the dynamics of this game had changed. They weren't just here for the land. The van door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness as it sped away. Inside, her captors were confident, laughing and joking about their easy catch. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Elena silently recited the details of her training, each protocol and tactic etched into her memory. As the van rattled along the rough backroads, she carefully listened, piecing together their route, counting turns and stops. Meanwhile, in the shadows of Dry Creek, her husband, Michael, had just returned home to find the gate ajar and Elena's favorite mug shattered on the porch. Panic gripped him as he called out her name, only to be met with silence. Back in the van, Elena's calm demeanor belied the fierce determination stirring within her. She knew her capture was not just a personal attack, but a strategic move against her husband. Yet, her captors were oblivious to the fact that they hadn't just kidnapped a rancher's wife, they had abducted the most lethal marshal to ever wear the badge. The realization of her identity would soon dawn on them, and when it did, Elena would be ready. She was not just planning her escape, she was strategizing the downfall of their entire operation. Each member of the club would soon learn the true cost of underestimating her, and what began as a simple land grab would escalate into a battle that could bring their criminal empire to its knees. As the van continued its relentless journey into the night, Elena's mind worked meticulously, dissecting every piece of information she could gather. The faint smell of oil and grease mixed with the stench of stale beer told her these men were not just petty criminals, but part of something larger, more organized. She listened to their conversations, picking up names and places, storing them away for when she would need them. In the shadows of the van, her hands, though cuffed, moved subtly, testing the give in the metal. Her fingers, trained and precise, felt for any imperfections that she could exploit. It wasn't long before she found a small, almost imperceptible weakness in the chain link. A surge of satisfaction ran through her as she filed this away for the right moment. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Michael was in a state of panic, but also of action. He knew his wife better than anyone else and knew that her disappearance was no ordinary incident. He rushed to the barn where they kept their emergency protocols, a set of plans they had hoped never to use. As he opened the concealed safe, his fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the combination. Inside, beside a pair of revolvers, lay a small, sophisticated radio transmitter. This was their lifeline, one that Elena insisted on installing in case either of them ever faced a dire situation. He grabbed it, clutching the cold metal as if it were a direct line to Elena herself. With the transmitter in hand, Michael made a crucial decision. He reached out to Elena's marshal service directly, using codes only they would understand. His voice was steady as he reported the situation, his words coded but clear. His wife was in danger, and it was not just a family emergency but a matter of national security. Back in the van, the night wore on, and Elena's captors relaxed, their initial tension fading as they assumed control of the situation. They talked more freely now, unaware that each word they spoke was being catalogued and would soon be used against them. They mentioned a rendezvous point, the Black Spur Bar, a known hangout for the motorcycle club. Elena, despite her predicament, couldn't help but smile. The pieces were coming together. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the van slowed and pulled into what sounded like a garage. Doors slammed, voices echoed off concrete walls, and Elena was roughly pulled out and led through a series of turns into a building. Her keen senses mapped the layout in her mind, noting every exit, every sharp turn, every staircase. She was finally thrown into a room, the door locking behind her. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she surveyed her new confines, a small, windowless space, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, the walls lined with tools and old furniture. It was a storage room, likely within the bar they had mentioned. Elena moved to the farthest corner of the room, her back against the wall, and allowed herself a moment to focus. She took deep, controlled breaths, centering herself. She was in enemy territory, but she was far from defeated. Outside, the sun fully rose, casting light on the grim reality of her situation, but also on the potential for her to turn this around. As she sat there, her mind was not on her fears, but on her training, her resolve, and the element of surprise she still held. Her captors thought they had captured a helpless victim, but they were gravely mistaken. Elena Hayes was about to show them exactly what it meant to underestimate the wrong federal marshal. Inside the musty confines of the storage room, Elena methodically assessed her surroundings for any tools that might aid in her escape. Her fingers brushed over a rusted screwdriver and a coil of old, frayed rope. While not ideal, these items could prove useful. She pocketed the screwdriver, feeling the familiar weight of potential in her palm. Outside the storage room, the sound of heavy boots and raucous laughter indicated her captors were settling in, possibly for a day of drinking and unwinding after what they perceived as a successful operation. The casual disregard for security was typical of overconfident criminals, Elena noted, a mistake that often led to their downfall. Back at the ranch, Michael was coordinating with federal authorities, explaining the urgency of the situation. A team of marshals was quickly assembled, ready to move out on his word. They understood the gravity of the situation, not just a kidnapping, but a direct challenge to federal law enforcement by a dangerous criminal organization. In the distance, a dust cloud signaled the arrival of reinforcements. Michael watched from his porch as black SUVs rolled up the dirt driveway, each one stopping with precision near the barn. Agents dressed in tactical gear disembarked, moving with purpose towards him. Their leader, a seasoned marshal named Ramirez, approached Michael with a firm handshake. "Mr. Hayes, we're going to do everything we can to get your wife back safely," Ramirez said, his voice resolute. "She's one of ours, and we protect our own." Michael nodded, his anxiety tempered by the confidence of the team assembled before him. "She might be doing half your job for you," he replied with a wry smile. "She's not one to sit around waiting for a rescue." Back in the Black Spur Bar, Elena's ears picked up the change in conversation from her captors. They were discussing a meeting with higher-ups in their organization, scheduled to take place at the bar that evening. This was her chance to gather critical intelligence, perhaps even find a way to communicate with the outside. She had to act before then. Using the screwdriver, she worked on the hinges of the door, her movements quiet and precise. The old metal groaned under her efforts, but she applied just enough pressure to avoid drawing attention. Minutes ticked by, each one bringing her closer to an opportunity for escape. Finally, the door gave way just enough for her to see out. The corridor was dimly lit, stretching out toward the sounds of the bar. She slipped through, her body tense and ready for any confrontation. Elena moved stealthily, avoiding the main areas, using her memory of the sounds and the brief glimpses she had caught of the layout when she was brought in. She found a small office, cluttered with papers and old computer equipment. It was the perfect place to find something useful. Her search was quick but thorough. She needed information, anything that could tell her more about the organization's plans and hierarchy. As she rifled through the desk, her hand brushed against a cell phone. It was a stroke of luck, likely belonging to one of the bikers. She pocketed it, knowing it could be her direct line to the marshals. Just as she was about to leave the office, she heard footsteps approaching. She ducked under the desk, her heart pounding not with fear, but with the adrenaline of the hunt. The door opened, and the voices from earlier floated into the room. Elena held her breath, listening as they discussed the logistics of their operation. Names, places, dates, all spilled out in their overconfidence. She memorized every word, every detail, her mind sharp as a blade. As the footsteps receded, Elena emerged from her hiding place. She was no longer just a captive, she was a gatherer of damning evidence, and soon, she would be the harbinger of their undoing. With the cell phone in hand, she found a secluded corner and dialed the only number she knew by heart, Michael's. As the phone rang, Elena felt a surge of hope. She was ready to turn the tables on her captors, and with the marshal's help, bring down the corrupt empire that dared to underestimate her. The phone buzzed twice before Michael picked up, his voice sharp and urgent. "Elena? Is that you?" "It's me," she whispered, keeping her voice low to avoid detection. Relief flooded her chest, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the mission. "I'm at the Black Spur Bar. They've got me in a storage room, but I've already made it out. There's a bigger operation brewing here, this isn't just about the land." Michael's voice tightened. "Are you safe? Tell me what you need." "I need backup," Elena replied. "The club is planning something big, could be drugs, weapons, or even trafficking. They're sloppy, though, talking openly. I picked up names and details, and I've got one of their phones. We can use this to get inside their network." "You're incredible," Michael muttered, a mixture of pride and worry in his voice. "The marshals are here. They've got a team ready to move." "Good," Elena said firmly. "Tell them to hang back for now. I'm not done gathering intel. If they storm in too soon, we'll lose our chance to bring this whole operation down." Michael hesitated. "Elena, are you sure? You're in there alone." A small smile tugged at her lips, despite the tension. "I've got this, Michael. Trust me." After a brief pause, he sighed. "I always do. Be careful." Elena ended the call and tucked the phone back into her pocket. The first piece of the puzzle was in place. Now, she needed to get more information and create an opening for the marshals to strike decisively. She slipped back into the shadows, moving carefully through the bar. The smell of stale beer and smoke grew stronger as she approached the main area. She peeked around a corner and saw the bikers gathered around a pool table, laughing and boasting about their exploits. At the head of the group was the scar-faced man who had led the raid on her ranch. Scarface, as she now thought of him, was barking orders to his men. "Tonight's the big deal. No screw-ups. The buyers are coming in from the city, and they're expecting us to deliver. We lock this down, and we'll be sitting on a fortune." Elena's jaw tightened. A deal of this magnitude meant the bar would soon be swarming with club members and their associates. It would be the perfect opportunity for the marshals to strike, but it also meant her window to act was shrinking. As she crept back toward the storage room, her thoughts raced. She needed to sabotage their operation, weaken their position, before the deal went down. Her fingers brushed against the screwdriver in her pocket, and an idea began to take shape. She slipped into the back of the building, finding the motorcycles parked in neat rows. Each bike was a lifeline for its rider, and without them, the gang would be stranded. She worked quickly, using the screwdriver to puncture tires and loosen critical components. The soft hiss of escaping air was a satisfying sound in the quiet of the garage. Once she had finished, Elena moved to the bar's power box, which was mounted on the wall in the back hallway. She studied it for a moment before flipping several breakers, plunging parts of the building into darkness. The sudden shouts and curses from the bikers told her the disruption had the desired effect. The chaos she had sown was a start, but it wasn't enough. She needed to get back into the main area to gather more intel and ensure the marshals had everything they needed to take the gang down. As she turned to head back, the sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. A large, burly biker appeared at the end of the hallway, his eyes narrowing as he spotted her. "What the hell are you doing back here?" Elena's heart pounded, but she didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, catching him off guard with a well-placed strike to his throat. He stumbled back, gasping for air, and she delivered a swift kick to his knee, dropping him to the ground. Before he could recover, she grabbed his head and slammed it against the wall, rendering him unconscious. She dragged his body into a nearby supply closet, her muscles straining with the effort. As she shut the door, she took a moment to steady her breathing. The stakes were rising, and the gang was likely to grow more suspicious. Elena straightened and adjusted her posture. She wasn't just a fugitive anymore, she was a predator in enemy territory, and every step she took brought her closer to dismantling the gang that had dared to cross her. Tonight, she would turn their arrogance into ashes. The air inside the bar was thick with tension as the bikers scrambled to restore order after the sudden blackout. Elena slipped back into the shadows, her movements precise and deliberate. She could hear Scarface barking orders, his frustration spilling over into sharp commands. "Get the damn power back on. And find out who's messing with our bikes." His voice was a snarl, cutting through the din of the gang's confusion. Elena knew the bikers were on edge, and their heightened alertness made her next steps even riskier. She couldn't afford to be caught now, not when the pieces of their operation were beginning to align in her mind. From the scattered conversations she had overheard, it was clear that tonight's deal wasn't just a routine transaction, it was the cornerstone of a larger scheme. She moved silently through the bar's back corridors, careful to stay out of sight. The phone she had taken buzzed in her pocket, and she ducked into a small alcove to check the screen. It was a message from an unknown number, likely one of the gang's associates. ETA 30 minutes. Buyers on schedule. No hiccups. Elena's lips curved into a grim smile. The gang had no idea their carefully laid plans were unraveling from within. She typed out a quick reply, her fingers moving deftly across the screen. Understood. All clear here. She sent the message, hoping to maintain the illusion that everything was proceeding as planned. With the buyers en route, she needed to act quickly to gather more intel and create a clear path for the marshals to strike. Elena's next target was the gang's meeting room. She had seen Scarface and his closest lieutenants retreat there earlier, carrying maps and papers that she suspected detailed their operation. The room was likely locked, but she had no intention of letting that stop her. As she approached the door, she heard voices inside, muffled but distinct. Scarface's growl was unmistakable. "This deal is just the start. Once we control the pipeline, no one will be able to touch us, not the marshals, not the locals, not even the feds." A second voice, calmer but no less menacing, replied, "You're sure the ranch is the key?" The old man's been stubborn as hell. Scarface laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "He'll fold. Especially when he realizes what we've got on his wife. Poor bastard probably thinks we're just using her as leverage." Elena's blood boiled at the words, but she forced herself to stay focused. She couldn't let emotion cloud her judgment, not now. She scanned the hallway, her eyes landing on a small fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. An idea took shape, and she acted swiftly. Grabbing the extinguisher, she positioned herself near the door and aimed at the lock. The sharp crack of metal striking metal echoed through the hallway as she smashed the extinguisher against the lock. The door burst open, and the startled gang members inside barely had time to react. Elena moved like a force of nature. She swung the extinguisher at the nearest man, catching him in the chest and sending him sprawling. Scarface reached for his gun, but she was faster, throwing the heavy extinguisher at him and knocking the weapon from his grasp. The third man lunged at her, but Elena sidestepped, using his momentum against him. She drove her elbow into his ribs, then followed up with a strike to his temple, dropping him to the floor. Scarface, recovering quickly, charged at her with a roar of fury. Elena met him head-on, using her training to counter his brute strength. She deflected his wild swings and landed a series of precise strikes to his jaw and throat. He staggered, his confidence replaced by a flicker of fear as he realized she was no ordinary opponent. "You made a big mistake taking me," Elena said, her voice cold and steady. "And an even bigger mistake underestimating me." Before Scarface could respond, Elena delivered a final, punishing blow that sent him crashing to the floor. She stood over him, her breathing steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Elena quickly searched the room, gathering papers and taking photos of the maps on the table. The documents confirmed her suspicions. The gang was running a large-scale smuggling operation, using strategic properties like her ranch to control key routes. The deal tonight was a linchpin, and without it, their empire would crumble. Satisfied with her findings, she slipped out of the room, leaving the groaning men behind. She knew she didn't have much time before the rest of the gang discovered what had happened. Elena moved with renewed purpose, her resolve unshakable. She had everything she needed to bring the marshals in and dismantle the gang's operation. Tonight, the Black Spur Bar would become ground zero for the gang's downfall, and Elena Hayes would ensure no one escaped justice. Elena crouched in the shadows near the bar's rear exit, her pulse steady as she checked the phone she'd taken. The buyers were now 15 minutes away, and the gang was still scrambling to recover from the chaos she'd unleashed. The punctured tires, the power outage, and the beating she'd delivered to Scarface and his cronies had thrown them off balance, but she knew it wouldn't last. She tapped out a message to Michael, her fingers flying over the keys. "Have the marshals stand by. Deal happening in 15. Documents confirm smuggling op. I'll signal when ready." The reply came quickly, "Understood. We're in position." Relief mingled with determination as Elena slipped the phone back into her pocket. The cavalry was close, but she wasn't done yet. The gang still had enough muscle and firepower to turn this into a bloodbath if they were given the chance. She had to ensure they were further weakened before the marshals made their move. The sound of footsteps approaching pulled her from her thoughts. Two bikers were headed her way, their voices low but tense as they discussed the evening's chaos. "Scar says someone's messing with us," one of them grumbled. "Probably that damn rancher or his wife. Should have tied her up tighter." Elena's lips curved into a grim smile. She waited until they were closer, then struck. She lunged from the shadows, her movements swift and silent. The first biker barely had time to register her presence before her elbow connected with his throat, cutting off his air. He dropped to the ground, gasping for breath. The second man reached for his weapon, but Elena was faster. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it until the gun fell from his grasp. She followed with a knee to his stomach, doubling him over, then finished with a brutal strike to the back of his head. He collapsed beside his companion, both men unconscious. Elena dragged their bodies into a nearby storage closet, her muscles burning with the effort. She couldn't risk them raising the alarm. Once they were secured, she took a moment to catch her breath and reassess the situation. The gang's numbers were dwindling, but they still had enough men to pose a serious threat. Scarface, though injured, was undoubtedly rallying his forces in preparation for the deal. Elena knew she couldn't stop the meeting from happening, but she could ensure it ended in disaster for the gang. She moved deeper into the building, weaving through the corridors until she reached the main floor. The bar was alive with tension, the bikers' usual bravado replaced by a sharp edge of paranoia. They were on high alert, scanning every corner for signs of trouble. Elena stayed low, slipping behind the bar to get closer to the action. From her vantage point, she could see Scarface at the center of the room, flanked by two heavily armed men. His face was bruised and swollen from their earlier fight, but his eyes burned with fury. "I don't care what it takes," he snarled. "We're locking this down. The buyers don't leave here without making that deal. Anyone gets in our way, they're dead." The bikers around him nodded, their loyalty evident despite the setbacks they'd faced. Elena's mind raced as she considered her options. She needed to sow more chaos, create enough confusion to give the marshals the upper hand when they stormed the bar. Her eyes landed on a row of whiskey bottles behind the bar, their amber contents gleaming in the dim light. An idea took shape, and she acted quickly, grabbing several bottles and stuffing cloths into their necks to create makeshift Molotov cocktails. It wasn't her usual style, but desperate times called for creative measures. As the minutes ticked down, Elena positioned herself near the bar's exit, ready to light the fuse on her plan. She knew the buyers would arrive soon, and with them, the perfect opportunity to strike. The gang's attention would be focused on the deal, leaving them vulnerable to an ambush. The roar of engines outside signaled the buyers' arrival. Scarface straightened, barking orders to his men to stand ready. Elena could feel the tension in the room spike as the bikers prepared for the transaction that would cement their dominance, or destroy it. She lit the first Molotov, the flame casting flickering shadows on the walls, and hurled it toward a cluster of bikes parked near the bar's entrance. The explosion was immediate, a burst of fire and smoke that sent bikers scrambling in every direction. Before the flames had fully settled, Elena lit another and tossed it toward the far end of the room, setting fire to a stack of crates. Chaos erupted as the gang members shouted and scrambled to contain the blaze. Amid the pandemonium, Elena pulled the phone from her pocket and sent a single-word message to Michael. "Go." She tucked the phone away, her heart pounding with anticipation. The marshals were coming, and the gang had no idea what was about to hit them. Elena moved to a defensible position near the rear exit, her eyes fixed on the chaos she had created. This was her moment. The gang had taken her from her home, underestimated her, and threatened everything she held dear. Now, she would bring them to their knees. The explosion of glass and fire was the spark that ignited absolute chaos. Flames licked at the walls, smoke curled toward the ceiling, and the bikers scrambled like rats on a sinking ship. Elena watched from her vantage point near the rear exit, her breathing steady as the bikers' disarray played out before her. Scarface roared above the din, his voice hoarse but commanding. "Get the buyers inside. Secure the stash. And find whoever's doing this." Elena knew she had only minutes before the marshals arrived. She surveyed the room, her sharp gaze catching every detail, the panic in the bikers' movements, the strategic positions of the armed lieutenants, the wary stares of the buyers, men in suits who looked completely out of place in the dingy bar. The buyers huddled near the entrance, flinching as another explosion shook the room. Elena's sabotage had done its job, the gang's confidence was unraveling. She gripped a crowbar she'd taken from the storage closet earlier, its weight familiar and reassuring in her hands. If things got close and messy, she was ready. The sound of engines roared outside, distinct and purposeful. These weren't the gang's bikes, but the black SUVs of the federal marshals. They had arrived, their timing impeccable. The bikers hadn't noticed yet, too consumed by the chaos within. Elena stepped deeper into the shadows, preparing to move when the time was right. The front door burst open, and a wave of marshals swept into the bar, their tactical gear gleaming in the firelight. Commands were shouted, weapons drawn, the clash of authority against anarchy filling the air. "Federal marshals! Everyone down! The voice of Ramirez, strong and unyielding, cut through the noise. The bikers hesitated for only a moment before they began to fight back. Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks that echoed off the walls. Elena ducked low, her instincts kicking in as she assessed the battlefield. She saw Scarface retreating toward the rear of the bar, dragging one of the buyers with him as a human shield. She didn't hesitate. Elena moved swiftly, staying low and weaving through the chaos. Her crowbar caught the back of a biker's knee as he aimed his weapon at the marshals, dropping him before he could fire. She snatched his gun, a heavy revolver, and continued toward Scarface. Scarface was cornered now, his escape route blocked by the flames that consumed the rear of the bar. His eyes were wild as he held the buyer in a chokehold, the muzzle of his pistol pressed to the man's temple. "Back off!" Scarface bellowed, his voice cracking. "I'll kill him. I swear." Elena stepped out of the shadows, the revolver steady in her hand. "Drop the gun, Scarface. You're done." He froze, his bloodshot eyes narrowing as he recognized her. "You. I should have killed you when I had the chance." "You should have," Elena replied, her voice cold. "Now let him go." Scarface's lip curled into a snarl, his grip on the buyer tightening. "I'll take you down with me, bitch." Before he could act, Elena fired. The shot was clean and precise, striking his wrist and forcing him to drop the gun. The buyer stumbled away, clutching his throat and gasping for air as marshals swarmed in to secure him. Scarface clutched his bleeding wrist, his bravado evaporating as he sank to his knees. Elena stepped closer, her eyes locked on his, daring him to make a move. He didn't. The fight was gone from him. Behind her, the battle was winding down. The marshals had taken control, subduing the remaining bikers and securing the buyers. Ramirez approached, his expression a mix of relief and respect. "Hell of a job, Hayes," he said, nodding toward Scarface. "You left us just enough pieces to clean up." Elena let out a slow breath, the tension finally easing from her shoulders. "I told you I'd signal when ready." "And you did," Ramirez replied, gesturing to his team. "We've got everything we need to dismantle this operation. Documents, witnesses, and a whole lot of evidence." Elena turned back to Scarface, who glared up at her with defiant hatred. "You're going away for a long time," she said, her voice steady. "You picked the wrong fight, and now you're going to pay for it." As the marshals hauled Scarface to his feet and led him away, Elena allowed herself a moment to take in the scene. The bar was in ruins, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burnt wood and fuel. But the bikers were subdued, their empire crumbling before her eyes. Outside, Michael was waiting, his face a mixture of worry and pride. As Elena stepped into the cool night air, he pulled her into a tight embrace. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. "I am now," she replied, leaning into him. The fight was over, but Elena knew the work was far from done. The bikers' empire had been broken, but the aftermath would take time to clean up. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of peace, the satisfaction of knowing justice had been served burning brighter than the flames still smoldering in the bar behind her. The cold night air was a stark contrast to the fiery chaos inside the bar. Elena took a moment to breathe deeply, letting the adrenaline ebb as she surveyed the scene. The marshals had secured the area, their vehicles blocking every exit. The once rowdy bikers were now subdued, lined up and cuffed, their weapons confiscated and their empire in ruins. Michael stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. His voice carried a mix of awe and relief, his pride in her unmistakable. Elena gave him a faint smile. "We did it. Couldn't have done this without the team." She gestured toward the marshals, who were working methodically to collect evidence and process the scene. Ramirez approached, his clipboard in hand, his expression serious but respectful. "We've rounded up everyone who was inside, including the buyers. They're already singing. Looks like this operation goes deeper than we thought. We'll be chasing leads for weeks." Elena nodded, her mind already turning over the possibilities. You'll want to cross-check their routes with the documents we recovered. If they're controlling pipelines, they've got partners on the outside. Shut those down, and you cut off their supply chain. Already on it, Ramirez replied. He hesitated for a moment, then added, most people would have waited for backup. What you did in there? He shook his head, a small grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. That's the kind of thing they write legends about. Elena shrugged, though her cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment. Didn't have much of a choice. They came after my family. I wasn't going to let them get away with that. Michael squeezed her shoulder, his silent support grounding her. You're incredible, Elena, he said quietly. But I'm glad it's over. Elena nodded, her gaze lingering on the defeated bikers. For now, she said. There's always another fight waiting. The marshals began loading the arrested bikers into their vehicles, and Elena turned her attention to Scarface, who stood sullenly by one of the SUVs, his hands cuffed behind his back. His defiance had faded, replaced by a simmering resentment that didn't intimidate her in the least. As she approached him, Scarface sneered. You think you've won, lady? You don't know the half of it. We're everywhere. Elena tilted her head, her expression calm but unyielding. Maybe, she replied. But you won't be. And without you, your little empire is going to crumble. I'll make sure of it. Scarface lunged forward, his movements restricted by the cuffs, but the marshals hauled him back before he could get close. Elena didn't flinch, her steely gaze meeting his with unwavering resolve. You made a mistake coming after me, she said, her voice low and even. And an even bigger mistake underestimating me. Scarface's eyes burned with hatred, but he said nothing as the marshals loaded him into the SUV and slammed the door shut. Elena turned away, her focus shifting to the task ahead. The marshals had everything they needed to dismantle the gang's network, but Elena knew the fight wasn't over. Scarface's taunts might have been bravado, but they hinted at a deeper truth: the gang's reach extended far beyond Dry Creek. The battle to bring them down completely would take time and effort. As the marshals began to pack up, Ramirez approached her again. You've done more than enough, Hayes, he said. You should get some rest. Let us handle the cleanup. Elena hesitated, her instincts urging her to stay involved. But Michael's hand on her arm reminded her that she had already given everything she had tonight. Call me if you need anything, she said finally. I'll be back at the ranch. Ramirez nodded, his respect evident. We'll keep you in the loop. Elena and Michael climbed into their truck, the quiet hum of the engine a welcome change from the chaos of the evening. As they drove away, Elena glanced back at the bar, its charred remains illuminated by the red and blue lights of the marshals' vehicles. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to relax. The gang had been broken, their operation exposed, and Scarface was on his way to a federal holding cell. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was a victory, a hard-earned, well-deserved victory. Michael reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. Let's go home, he said softly. Elena nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Yeah, she replied. Let's go home. As the truck rolled down the dirt road toward the ranch, the first light of dawn began to creep over the mountains. It was a new day, and with it came the promise of rebuilding, healing, and preparing for whatever challenges lay ahead. For now, though, Elena allowed herself a moment of peace, knowing she had faced the storm and emerged stronger on the other side. The ranch came into view as the first rays of sunlight brushed the landscape, casting the fields in a soft golden glow. For the first time in what felt like years, Elena allowed herself to exhale fully. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, though her mind still raced with the events of the night. Every detail, every confrontation, replayed in her mind like an old reel. Michael parked the truck near the barn, shutting off the engine. The silence that followed was heavy but comforting, like a warm blanket after a storm. He turned to Elena, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and concern. You sure you're okay? He asked softly. Elena gave him a small, tired smile. I'm okay, she said, though the weight of the night lingered in her voice. Just need some time to process. Michael nodded, his fingers brushing hers gently. Take all the time you need. I'll get the coffee started. As he headed toward the house, Elena stayed behind, stepping out of the truck and letting the crisp morning air wash over her. She walked toward the fence line, her boots crunching softly against the gravel. The land stretched out before her, its vastness both grounding and humbling. This ranch wasn't just property, it was home, a symbol of everything she and Michael had built together. But it was also a target. Scarface's words echoed in her mind, "We're everywhere." Elena's jaw tightened. She had struck a major blow to the gang's operations, but she knew their reach extended beyond Dry Creek. They wouldn't let this defeat go unanswered. If she and Michael were to keep their home safe, they needed to prepare for what came next. Back at the house, Michael was already in the kitchen, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. He set 2 mugs on the table as Elena walked in, her boots scuffing lightly against the floorboards. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "You need a break." Elena chuckled softly as she took the seat. "You're starting to sound like Ramirez." Michael shrugged, his expression softening. He's not wrong. They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence, the warmth of the drink soothing after the cold chaos of the night. Michael finally broke the quiet, his voice steady but serious. "What do you think happens next?" he asked. Elena stared into her mug for a moment before answering. "The marshals will dig deeper into the gang's network, follow the money and the routes. It'll take time, but they'll take the whole operation down." "And us?" Michael pressed gently. Elena's gaze met his, her expression resolute. "We keep our guard up. They came after us once, they might try again. But we're ready for them." Michael nodded, his trust in her absolute. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted their conversation. Elena tensed instinctively, her hand moving toward the revolver she'd set on the counter. Michael placed a calming hand on her arm. "It's probably Ramirez," he said. He was right. A black SUV pulled up outside, and Ramirez stepped out, his expression serious, but not urgent. Elena met him on the porch, her sharp gaze scanning his face for any sign of bad news. "We've got Scarface locked down tight," Ramirez said, getting straight to the point. "And the buyers are flipping faster than we can process them. Looks like the gang's network stretches into 3 neighboring states. Drugs, weapons, smuggling, you name it, they're into it." Elena nodded, her expression unreadable. "What's the plan?" "Interagency task force," Ramirez replied. "We'll take the intel you gathered and start dismantling their operations piece by piece. But it's going to take time, and there's one thing you should know." "What's that?" Elena asked, her tone cautious. "Scarface wasn't bluffing," Ramirez said grimly. "They have allies, dangerous ones. We've intercepted chatter suggesting they might retaliate. You and Michael should be prepared." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. "We've handled worse." Ramirez smiled faintly, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "I don't doubt that. Just keep your guard up." As Ramirez headed back to his SUV, Elena turned to Michael. He was leaning against the doorframe, his expression calm but alert. She walked over to him, her hand slipping into his. "We've got work to do," she said simply. Michael nodded, his voice steady. "We always do." As the SUV disappeared down the road, the morning light grew brighter, casting the ranch in a warm, hopeful glow. Elena stood with Michael, her resolve as unshakable as the land beneath their feet. They had faced the storm and survived, but she knew the fight wasn't over. It never really was. The day passed slowly on the ranch, the air heavy with an uneasy calm. Michael busied himself with repairs around the property, mending fences, checking on the livestock, and making sure the gates were secure. Meanwhile, Elena sat at the dining table, spreading out the maps and documents she'd taken from the gang's meeting room. The papers detailed routes and drop points, coded transactions, and lists of contacts. It was an intricate web of criminal activity that had taken years to build. Yet, as Elena sifted through the information, she saw the fractures, weak links in the chain that could be exploited. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Ramirez. "Hayes," she answered, her tone sharp and alert. "We've cross-referenced the documents you recovered with our intel," Ramirez said without preamble. "You were right. The gang's using properties like your ranch as strategic nodes for their operations. They've already taken over 3 others in the region." Elena's jaw tightened. "And the owners?" "2 sold willingly. The third," Ramirez hesitated. "He and his family are missing. We think the gang's holding them somewhere." The weight of his words settled over Elena like a lead blanket. She clenched her fists, her anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "Any leads on where they might be?" "Not yet," Ramirez admitted. "But the buyers we arrested are talking. If they give us anything solid, you'll be the first to know." "Good," Elena said firmly. "Keep me in the loop." She ended the call and leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The gang's tactics were ruthless, but predictable. If they had taken the family, they would keep them close to one of their operations. Elena's gaze fell to the map in front of her, her fingers tracing the routes marked in red. There was one location that stood out, a cluster of properties near the county line, close to a stretch of abandoned railroads. It was isolated but accessible, the perfect place to keep hostages while avoiding attention. Elena folded the map and stood, grabbing her revolver and a pair of binoculars. Michael entered the room, wiping his hands on a rag. He took one look at her determined expression and frowned. "You've got that look," he said. "I think I know where they might be holding that family," Elena replied. "I'm going to check it out." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Not alone, you're not." "I can handle it," Elena said, her voice steady but firm. Michael stepped closer, his hand resting on her arm. "I know you can. But we're in this together, remember?" Elena hesitated, her instinct to protect him clashing with her trust in his abilities. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. But we stick to the edges, no direct contact unless we're sure." Michael grabbed his rifle and a flashlight, his resolve matching hers. "Let's go." The drive to the suspected location was quiet, the tension between them palpable. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the rugged terrain. As they approached the cluster of properties, Elena pulled off the road and parked behind a dense thicket of trees. She and Michael moved on foot, staying low and quiet as they approached the area. Elena raised her binoculars, scanning the buildings for signs of activity. A faint glow emanated from one of the structures, and she could make out the shapes of 2 men standing near the entrance, rifles slung over their shoulders. "That's them," she whispered. "The gang's using this place as a base." Michael frowned. "You think the family's inside?" "It's likely," Elena replied. "We'll need to confirm before we call it in." They crept closer, careful to stay out of sight. As they reached the edge of the property, Elena spotted movement near a side window. A woman's silhouette appeared briefly before vanishing, followed by the faint sound of a child's laughter. "They're here," Elena said, her voice low but urgent. "We have to move fast." Michael nodded, his grip on his rifle tightening. "What's the plan?" Elena's mind worked quickly, weighing their options. "We create a distraction, draw the guards away. Once they're gone, we go in and get the family out." "And if more of the gang shows up?" Michael asked. Elena's eyes hardened. "Then we deal with them." The fire in her voice left no room for doubt. Michael nodded, his trust in her absolute. "Let's do it." Elena pulled a small bundle of firecrackers from her bag, a last-minute addition she'd grabbed before leaving the ranch. She lit the fuse and tossed them toward the far side of the property. The sharp crackling sound shattered the quiet, drawing the attention of the guards. "What the hell was that?" one of them muttered, raising his rifle. "Check it out," the other replied. "I'll cover here." As one guard moved toward the noise, Elena and Michael slipped toward the building, their movements silent and precise. They reached the side entrance and found it unlocked. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of grease and sweat. Elena led the way, her revolver drawn, every sense on high alert. The sound of muffled voices guided them to a locked door at the back of the building. Michael knelt by the lock, pulling out a small toolkit he'd brought along. "Give me a minute," he whispered. Elena stood guard, her heart pounding as she watched the hallway for any sign of movement. She trusted Michael completely, but every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the lock clicked open, and Michael pushed the door inward. Inside, a man, a woman, and 2 children huddled together, their faces pale and scared. The man's eyes widened as he saw Elena and Michael. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Federal marshals," Elena said quietly. "We're here to get you out." The man nodded, his relief palpable. "Thank God." Elena motioned for them to follow. "Stay close and stay quiet." As they began to make their way back to the entrance, a shout echoed from outside. The remaining guard had discovered the ruse, and reinforcements were on their way. The quiet rescue had just turned into a fight for survival. The shout outside sent a chill down Elena's spine. She glanced at Michael, who nodded tightly, his rifle ready. The family huddled close behind them, the father shielding his wife and children as best he could. Elena signaled for everyone to stay quiet and moved toward the door to listen. Boots stomped against gravel as reinforcements arrived, their voices loud and angry. "They're here somewhere. Find them," one of the bikers barked. Elena's mind raced. The building had limited exits, and the bikers were closing in. A direct confrontation wasn't an option, not with the family in tow. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on a narrow window high on the wall. "Michael," she whispered, pointing to the window. "That's our way out." Michael looked at the family, then back at her. "It's tight, but it'll work." Elena turned to the man. "We're getting you out through that window. Can you climb?" He nodded quickly. "Yeah, we can do it." Michael boosted the children up first, their small bodies wriggling through the narrow opening with ease. Elena followed, helping the mother climb up, her hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The father was last, his broad frame a tighter fit, but he managed to squeeze through. Outside, the air was cold and still, the quiet only broken by the shouts of the bikers searching the building. Elena motioned for the family to follow her as they crouched low and moved toward the tree line. The cover of darkness worked in their favor, but it wouldn't last. They were halfway to the thicket when the beam of a flashlight swept across them. "There," a voice yelled. Gunfire erupted, bullets whizzing past as Elena pushed the family forward. "Go! Keep moving," she shouted, her voice sharp but controlled. Michael dropped to one knee, returning fire with precision. His shots forced the bikers to take cover, buying them precious seconds. Elena joined him, her revolver barking in the night as she aimed for the bikers' legs, disabling but not killing them. The family reached the trees, their figures disappearing into the shadows. Elena and Michael began to fall back, their movements synchronized as they covered each other. The bikers were relentless, their shots splintering the bark around them. As they reached the cover of the trees, Elena pulled out her phone and dialed Ramirez. "We're pinned down near the county line," she said breathlessly. "We've got hostages, need immediate backup." "Hold tight," Ramirez replied. "We're on our way." Elena ended the call and turned to Michael. "We need to keep them away from the family until help arrives." Michael nodded, his jaw tight. "Let's make it happen." They positioned themselves strategically among the trees, using the terrain to their advantage. The bikers charged into the woods, their flashlights sweeping erratically as they searched for their prey. Elena took a deep breath, her grip on her revolver steady. The first biker came too close, his flashlight giving away his position. Elena fired, her shot striking his leg and sending him sprawling with a cry of pain. Michael took out another, his rifle's crack echoing through the forest. But for every biker they disabled, more seemed to emerge. Elena's mind raced, calculating their odds. The bikers were disorganized, their anger clouding their judgment, but they still had the numbers. "We need to move," she said to Michael. "They'll flank us if we stay here." Michael nodded, his eyes scanning the forest. "Northwest. There's a ridge we can use for cover." Elena motioned for the family to follow, keeping her voice low. "Stay close. We'll keep you safe." They moved quickly, the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath their boots masked by the chaos of the firefight. The ridge came into view, its rocky terrain providing a natural barrier. Elena positioned the family behind a large boulder, her body shielding them as Michael took up a defensive position. The bikers closed in, their flashlights bobbing closer. Elena's heart pounded as she fired again, her aim precise. A biker cried out, his weapon clattering to the ground. Another lunged toward her, but Michael's shot dropped him before he could get close. Then, in the distance, the unmistakable roar of engines cut through the night. Elena's heart leapt. The marshals had arrived. Spotlights illuminated the forest as black SUVs barreled onto the scene. The marshals disembarked quickly, their tactical gear gleaming as they fanned out, their voices commanding and confident. "Drop your weapons. Hands in the air." Ramirez's voice boomed. The bikers hesitated, their bravado faltering as they realized they were outmatched. One by one, they surrendered, their weapons clattering to the ground. The marshals secured them swiftly, their movements efficient and precise. Elena lowered her revolver, her chest heaving as the adrenaline began to fade. Ramirez approached, his face lit with a mixture of relief and respect. "Nice work, Hayes," he said, his tone sincere. "We've got it from here." Elena nodded, her gaze shifting to the family. They were safe, their faces pale, but filled with gratitude. The mother clutched her children tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You're heroes," the father said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Elena met his gaze, her voice steady, but soft. "Just doing what's right." As the marshals rounded up the remaining bikers and secured the scene, Elena and Michael exchanged a glance. The fight wasn't over, but for now, they had won a small but significant battle. The night was far from quiet, but in the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, justice could prevail. The forest was a battlefield turned staging ground, the marshals working efficiently to secure the bikers and clear the scene. Elena leaned against the boulder, exhaustion finally settling into her bones. She wiped her brow, her hand trembling slightly, though she refused to let it show. Michael approached, his rifle slung over his shoulder. His face was streaked with dirt, his expression a mixture of relief and pride. "You okay?" he asked softly. Elena nodded, though her voice was quiet when she spoke. "I will be." The family they had rescued sat nearby, wrapped in blankets provided by the marshals. The children clung to their mother, their eyes wide but no longer brimming with fear. The father stood, his posture stiff as he approached Elena and Michael. "I don't know how to thank you," the man said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my family. We thought," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "You're safe now," Elena said firmly. "That's all that matters." The man nodded, his gratitude evident in the way he held Elena's gaze. "If there's anything we can do, anything you need, you let us know." Elena offered a small, reassuring smile. "Focus on rebuilding. That's enough." Ramirez strode over, his clipboard in hand and a satisfied look on his face. "We've rounded up the bikers," he reported. "Every one of them's in custody, and we've secured the property. Looks like you were right about this place being a key node in their operation." Elena crossed her arms, her expression grim. "They're just the foot soldiers. The real power is higher up. We need to keep pushing until the whole network is dismantled." "We will," Ramirez assured her. "But tonight, you've done more than enough. Go home. Get some rest. Michael gave her a pointed look, silently seconding Ramirez's suggestion. Elena hesitated, the weight of unfinished business pulling at her. But as she looked at the family, their faces filled with hope and relief, she realized that, for tonight, they had achieved something meaningful. Fine, she said, her voice tinged with reluctant acceptance. But keep me updated. Ramirez smirked. Wouldn't dare leave you out of the loop. As the marshals continued their work, Elena and Michael began the walk back to their truck, the forest quiet now except for the distant hum of the vehicles. The tension between them eased with every step, the weight of the night gradually lifting. When they reached the truck, Elena paused, her hand resting on the door handle. She looked at Michael, her voice soft but steady. Thank you for coming with me. Michael smiled, his eyes warm. You really think I'd let you face all this alone? She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. No, I suppose not. They climbed into the truck, the engine rumbling to life as Michael steered them onto the dirt road. The drive back to the ranch was silent but comfortable, the kind of quiet that spoke of mutual understanding and trust. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn painting the horizon. The house stood in stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind, a beacon of stability and home. Inside, Michael set his rifle down and headed to the kitchen to start the coffee. Elena lingered by the door, her gaze sweeping over the familiar surroundings. It felt surreal, returning to this peaceful place after the intensity of the night. When Michael returned with 2 steaming mugs, he handed one to her and raised his own in a small toast. To surviving another day. Elena clinked her mug against his, a faint smile tugging at her lips. And to making it count. They sat together on the porch as the sun rose, the warmth of the coffee grounding them in the moment. The battle they had fought was just one piece of a larger war, but for now, they could take solace in their victory. As the light of a new day spread across the ranch, Elena felt a renewed sense of purpose. The gang's empire was crumbling, its leaders exposed. There was still work to be done, but she knew they were on the right path. She glanced at Michael, his profile outlined by the golden glow of the sunrise. Together, they were stronger than any storm, more resolute than any threat. And as long as they stood side by side, they could face whatever came next. The quiet of the ranch was a stark contrast to the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Elena had barely had time to enjoy the morning's calm before her phone buzzed insistently on the kitchen counter. The name on the screen read Ramirez, and the sharpness in her eyes returned as she answered. Hayes, she said, her voice clipped and professional. Elena, Ramirez began, his tone urgent, we've got a situation. We interrogated one of the buyers from last night's bust. He spilled something big, a higher-up in the gang's network is moving to secure their assets. They know we're closing in, and they're trying to regroup. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. How big is this player? Big enough to pull strings across state lines, Ramirez replied. Goes by the name Vulture. Real name still a mystery, but he's one of their top enforcers, and he's headed your way. Here? Elena's jaw clenched. Why? Your ranch, Ramirez said bluntly. It's still a strategic piece of land for them, and they're not giving it up without a fight. Elena exhaled slowly, her mind already working. What's the time frame? Hours, maybe less, Ramirez said. We're mobilizing a team, but you need to prepare. Elena ended the call and turned to Michael, who had been listening from across the room. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, the same steely resolve she had come to rely on. They're coming, she said simply. Michael set his coffee mug down and crossed the room to stand beside her. Then we make sure they regret it. The next hour was a whirlwind of preparation. Michael reinforced the ranch's gates and set up makeshift barricades around the property's most vulnerable points. Elena retrieved a cache of weapons and ammunition from a hidden compartment in the barn, her movements efficient and practiced. This isn't just about us anymore, Elena said as they worked. If they get control of the ranch, they'll use it to rebuild. "We can't let that happen." "We won't," Michael assured her. "We've held this place through worse." The sun was high in the sky when the sound of engines shattered the stillness. Elena and Michael exchanged a look, their hands tightening on their weapons. The fight had come to their doorstep. Elena climbed to the roof of the barn, her rifle slung across her back. From her vantage point, she could see the dust cloud rising in the distance, the telltale sign of approaching vehicles. Through her scope, she counted 4 SUVs and a dozen motorcycles, their riders clad in leather and denim, weapons glinting in the sunlight. "They're here," she said into the radio clipped to her vest. Michael's voice crackled in reply. "Got it. I'm in position." Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself. The gang wasn't just here to intimidate, they were here to take control. But she and Michael weren't about to let that happen. The first wave of bikers reached the gate, their engines rumbling ominously. One of them dismounted and approached the barricade, a shotgun slung over his shoulder. He shouted, his voice carrying across the open field. "We know you're in there, Hayes. Open the gate, and maybe we'll let you walk away." Elena didn't respond. Instead, she lined up her shot and fired. The man dropped to the ground, his shotgun clattering beside him. The rest of the bikers roared in anger, their engines revving as they surged forward. The fight erupted in a blur of gunfire and shouts. Elena picked off targets with precision from her perch, each shot deliberate and calculated. Michael held the line at the barricade, his rifle's sharp crack a steady rhythm in the chaos. The gang's vehicles attempted to breach the gate, but Michael's barricades held firm, forcing them to dismount and engage on foot. This was the fight Elena and Michael had prepared for, a battle on their terms, on their land. Elena scanned the battlefield, her sharp eyes spotting the leader of the group. He was tall and broad, his leather jacket emblazoned with a vulture insignia. He shouted orders, his voice commanding and fierce. "Vulture," Elena muttered, her sights trained on him. As she took aim, Vulture seemed to sense her presence. He looked up, his piercing gaze locking onto her position on the barn roof. He raised a hand, signaling his men to cover him, and began moving toward the house. "Elena." Michael's voice came through the radio. "He's coming your way." "I see him," she replied, her voice steady. Elena shifted her position, her focus narrowing to Vulture as he advanced. She fired, but he was quick, ducking behind a vehicle as the bullet ricocheted off the metal. He returned fire, forcing her to take cover behind the barn's peaked roof. The battle raged on, but Elena's attention was locked on Vulture. This was no ordinary thug, his movements were calculated, his aim precise. He was a predator, and he had his sights set on her. But Elena Hayes was no prey. As Vulture closed in, Elena readied herself for the final confrontation. This was her home, her fight, and she wasn't about to let it end here. Not without taking him down first. Elena's breath came steady as she shifted her position on the barn's roof, her rifle at the ready. Vulture moved with the precision of a trained operator, using cover to inch closer to the house. He was no ordinary gang enforcer, his tactics spoke of experience, and that made him dangerous. Michael's voice crackled over the radio. "He's getting too close, Elena. You need to slow him down." She scanned the battlefield below. The bikers were pinned down by Michael's sharp shooting and the barricades they had constructed, but a few had broken through, making their way toward the barn and house. Time was running out. Elena steadied her rifle, lining up her sights on Vulture as he darted between cover. She waited for the perfect moment, her finger hovering lightly over the trigger. He paused briefly behind an overturned ATV, peering out to gauge his next move. Her shot rang out, sharp and deadly. The bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him sideways and forcing him to retreat behind the vehicle. It wasn't a kill shot, but it had slowed him down. "Got him," Elena said into the radio, her tone sharp. "He's wounded, but not down." "Good," Michael replied. "Let's keep it that way." Elena reloaded quickly, her hands moving with practiced precision. Below, she saw two bikers flanking the barn, trying to cut off her position. She shifted her aim, taking one out with a clean shot to the leg. The other hesitated, firing wildly in her direction, but Elena dropped flat against the roof, the bullets harmlessly striking the wooden shingles. She rolled to her side, taking aim again. The second biker was scrambling for cover, but he wasn't fast enough. Her shot clipped his arm, and his weapon fell to the ground as he clutched the wound. Elena's attention snapped back to Vulture. He was on the move again, ignoring the blood staining his jacket as he advanced toward the house. His focus was relentless, his path unwavering. She could see the determination in his every movement. He wasn't leaving without a fight. "Elena, he's almost at the porch." Michael's voice was urgent. "I see him," she replied, her tone steady, despite the tension in her chest. Elena slung her rifle over her back and climbed down the side of the barn, landing silently in the shadows. She drew her revolver, its weight familiar in her hand, and moved toward the house. If Vulture wanted to take this fight up close, she was more than ready. As she rounded the corner, she caught sight of him. He was crouched near the porch, his handgun drawn as he scanned for threats. Elena didn't hesitate. She fired, the shot grazing his side and forcing him into the open. Vulture turned, his eyes locking on her with a predatory gleam. He raised his weapon, and they fired almost simultaneously. Elena ducked behind the porch railing, her ears ringing from the close-quarters gunfire. "You're better than I expected," Vulture called out, his voice calm, despite the chaos. "But you're outnumbered and outmatched. Why not make it easy on yourself?" Elena's lips curled into a faint smirk as she peeked out from cover. "Easy's never been my style." Vulture chuckled darkly. "Fair enough." He moved quickly, his footsteps heavy against the wooden porch. Elena anticipated his angle and fired again, the shot narrowly missing as he shifted at the last second. He returned fire, the bullets splintering the wood around her. Elena's mind raced, analyzing his movements and calculating her next move. She couldn't let this turn into a drawn-out exchange, she needed to end it, and fast. She spotted a metal rake leaning against the side of the house, its sharp tines catching the sunlight. An idea formed, and she acted quickly. Using her foot, she kicked the rake into Vulture's path just as he advanced. The sudden obstacle threw him off balance, and Elena seized the moment. She lunged forward, her revolver aimed squarely at his chest. "Drop it," she ordered, her voice ice-cold. Vulture froze, his weapon half-raised. For a moment, his expression was unreadable, and then he smirked. "You've got guts. I'll give you that." He let his gun fall to the ground and raised his hands, the smirk never leaving his face. Elena didn't lower her weapon. "You're done, Vulture," she said, her tone deadly. "Your gang's finished." "Maybe," he replied, his voice dripping with smugness. "But you've only cut off one head. There are plenty more where I come from." Elena stepped closer, her revolver still trained on him. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Behind her, the sound of heavy boots signaled the arrival of Michael and Ramirez. The marshals took over, securing Vulture and leading him away. Elena exhaled slowly, the tension in her body easing as the danger passed. Michael approached, his eyes scanning her for any sign of injury. "You okay?" Elena nodded, holstering her revolver. "I'm fine. It's over." "For now," Michael said, his voice low. "But he's right, isn't he? This isn't the end." Elena's gaze hardened as she watched the marshals load Vulture into one of the SUVs. "No," she said quietly. "But it's a start." The fight wasn't over, but tonight, they had won. And Elena Hayes wasn't about to back down until the entire gang's empire was nothing but ashes. As the SUVs roared away, carrying Vulture and the remaining bikers into custody, the ranch finally fell silent. The air, once thick with the sounds of gunfire and shouts, was now calm, filled only with the rustle of the wind through the fields. Elena stood near the porch, her hands resting on her hips, surveying the aftermath. Michael approached her, his rifle slung over his shoulder and his expression equal parts relief and exhaustion. "It's over," he said, his voice low. "At least for now." Elena nodded, her sharp gaze still scanning the horizon as if expecting another attack. "For now," she agreed. But Vulture wasn't bluffing. "They'll regroup. They always do." Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And when they do, we'll be ready." Elena turned to face him, her resolve unshaken. "We don't wait for them, Michael. We take the fight to them. If they think they can come after us, our home, they need to know the cost." Michael studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Whatever you need, I'm with you." Later that night, as the stars blanketed the sky, Elena sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey in hand. Michael joined her, carrying a second glass. They clinked their drinks together in a silent toast. "To surviving another storm," Michael said, his voice soft. Elena smiled faintly. "And to making sure they don't come back." The distant hum of insects and the occasional howl of a coyote were the only sounds, but Elena's mind was far from quiet. She replayed the events of the past days, the battles fought, and the lives saved. It was a victory, but a fragile one. The gang's network was vast, and their defeat tonight was only one step in a much larger war. Her phone buzzed on the small table beside her. She picked it up, the screen displaying Ramirez's name. "Hayes," she answered. "Elena," Ramirez said, his tone brisk. "We've started processing Vulture and the others. The intel we pulled from him is extensive. Safe houses, supply routes, names. It's going to take weeks to sort through it all." "Good," Elena replied. "The more we know, the faster we can dismantle their operation." "There's one more thing," Ramirez added. "Vulture didn't just operate in this region. He had ties to a bigger organization. We're talking national, maybe even international." Elena's grip on the phone tightened. "What kind of organization?" "Organized crime syndicate," Ramirez said. "Drugs, weapons, trafficking, you name it." The bikers were just one piece of the puzzle. Elena exhaled slowly, her mind already working. "Send me everything you've got." Ramirez hesitated. "You've done enough, Elena. Let us handle this." "I'm already involved," she said firmly. "And you know I don't stop halfway." There was a pause before Ramirez sighed. "I'll send it over." Elena ended the call and set the phone down, her gaze distant. Michael watched her, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. "Looks like it's bigger than we thought," he said. "It always is," Elena replied, her tone laced with determination. "But that just means we've got more work to do." Michael took her hand, his grip steady and reassuring. "We'll do it together." She nodded, her resolve unwavering. The fight ahead would be long and dangerous, but Elena Hayes had never shied away from a challenge. The gang had underestimated her once, and they had paid the price. Now, she was taking the battle to them, and she wouldn't stop until every piece of their corrupt empire was dismantled. As the night deepened, Elena sat with Michael, the stars above a silent witness to their resolve. The ranch, their home, stood strong, a symbol of everything they were fighting for. And as long as they had each other, they knew they could face whatever came next. The storm wasn't over, but Elena Hayes was ready. If you enjoyed this story, please leave your comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where your support means the world to us. We look forward to bringing you more content that inspires growth, joy, and purpose. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.